Hello and welcome to Stochastic Agency. I'm Brian, and I don't do reviews of games that I don't play or have not played. I really take a strong stance as far as when I watch reviews that, especially if the channel that's doing reviews is cranking out reviews, that more than likely I'm not watching a review, I'm watching a first look video. So, with all due respect to Runehammer, I just got my second book, the volume 2 for Crown and Skull. I've had the first volume of Crown and Skull for quite some time. I've gotten about halfway through it because I can't, I cannot just read one book at a time. I'm one of those people that has to read a couple of books, and I can't read all of the stuff in the same genre. So I read fiction and nonfiction kind of side by side a lot of times, and I read science fiction and fantasy side by side a lot of times. So without further ado, we've got the two volumes. I just got my volume 2 yesterday, and today is the actual first time I'm going to really take a look through it. I'm not going to look through volume 1 because there's already a ton of videos out there on it, and there are people who have actually played the game. So if you're looking for something about the mechanics, this is not really going to be the video for you. Most of us, as you can kind of see from the wall behind me, who've been in the role-playing hobby for any amount of time, can soon begin to collect a library of books. And it's a bit of a joke between the role-playing community and the wargaming community that they're more than likely to get to play multiple games, although I would debate that, with Warhammer being the primary game that gets often, like D&D, gets talked often about. So this is a book which is constructed in, and this is volume 2. Interesting that one of the things I notice is that production-wise, the pinch is way nicer on volume 2. Now, hopefully, that is not due to my book sitting on the shelf and just expanding. It's just a nice feature in book construction. I've always been fascinated with the making of books, from Smith binding, case binding, perfect binding, getting to understand the cut sizes of books. I was actually able to do a one-off layout for Dark Age of Man, a book that was produced in print on demand, and it was done in what you would call, the cut size for that was a comic book size. So I believe that is 10 by 7. So gutter is nice. Same foiling, same, book feel of the cover. I can feel the same weight in the book, the heft of the book. The spine is nice. We're not looking at a full, stitch-bound book, but, in reading volume 1, I haven't really had an issue with any page release or a really hard cracking of the spine. So the book is, as an artifact of play, is really well constructed. The end pages, volume 2 here, we can see we've got artwork this time versus the map, which we get in the first one. And this is something that I really do appreciate about books that have been released recently, is the making use of the end pages. If you're looking at trying to get your own book produced, the unfortunate thing is that most print-on-demand businesses like DriveThruRPG, Lightning Press, and other US-based print-on-demand manufacturers do not really give you the option to make use of this, which is, I think, an underutilized feature in the print-on-demand field. You're already taking a page and sticking it to the book's guts. So why not allow, the use of end pages in print on demand? A lot of times you get, if we think about oh, what is it? Gosh, yeah, Mark Mori. Uh, the end pages had charts on them, so it's a great way to just make use of what would typically be an underutilized space. The book follows the same design principles. It follows the same layout principles going through. We still have all of our frames that we had before. We get right into our table of contents right at the beginning, and we can see that we're not going to see a repeat of information, pardon me, from the volume one. We do have a little bit more talk about player focus, and that's something I'd like to bring up just real quick. It's something I really appreciate about what Ingram is doing is, we for the last few years in role-playing games, there has been a lot of discussion around the indie field and indie game development and independent approaches. And there's this contest, it seems, between traditional games and independent games, which I think is ridiculous. But here we get to see the actual discussion of the player side in the game. So we've got a full player section, a full GM section, and as we kind of go in and take a look at the player's guide, much of the opening, the Learning Stone section is, fiction that we get, and then we go into concepts and content here, So this is what I think has been on the rise as far as the rise of the role player. Let me put it that way, is that when you look at something like YouTube, we see an awful lot of material that is just solely directed at GMs, DMs, storytellers, keepers, whatever the person who is running the game is called, right? And there's very little in the way of discussion on the player side. We get, and I try to touch on it somewhat. What is the idea of being a good player? You need to have a backstory. Okay, well, it's not just the DM's responsibility to do a backstory, right? So here, we're going in and we're talking about, the basics of translating exciting concepts into playable content expanded in Volume 1, Crown and Skull, into a specific area of hobby, so-called the dungeon, so often employed in the role-playing games. Dungeons are the roast chicken of role-playing, ever-present, always welcome, always a bit to eat, always a bit more to eat than anticipated. In this volume, we'll take a blended approach, a pinch of vintage, and a dash of innovation. And that's what I can really appreciate about what Brandish is doing, is that he is wanting to get on that side of the table and talk more about that side of the table, about what players can do and what players probably should start to think about if you're going to play a role-playing game. Because it's all not about me on this side of the table force feeding you on that side of the table, contents of the conversation. This has really got to be a back and forth. And it's good to see, something like this is really being brought up. We move into a player focus. Then he starts to move into more of the Legendarium, an Age of Dragons. And you can see we've still got, this classic frame, which has similar variations throughout, but the themes of the frames are really done very well. They help to kind of contain and maintain interest on every page. Got the dragon tree, still little bits and quotes. Always nice to see something like this in here. If you're willing to dive into a setting's verisimilitude to support the designer's approach that they're taking to their world building, stuff like this is always really nice to have. Now, he follows the same format as far as illustrations go. We get to see spot art throughout the book, but we get to keep the illustration section, which is nice. We get to see, a definitive, and without even looking at it, I can tell that this is, from Bernal. And that's one of the things that over the years that I've been reading and flipping through various different RPG books is to see and identify and get used to the artist's style and the collection that, especially in a situation like this, where it's an artist and a writer going through a product and then bringing on other artists, whose artwork is similar to in many ways, but different enough from, so that you get a good collection of styles which has a good cohesiveness to it. Like we can see in these two sections here, two different, or same artist on both pages, kind of followed by, or preceded by Ingram's. And, even his art style will vary slightly, but he does have a kind of, as you can kind of see, I've got the Darkest Dungeon shirt on. The Darkest Dungeon and that kind of Magnola type feel where he's not afraid to use the saturated blacks and outlining of shape and form to kind of really give that signature to his art style. You can see that in the ICRPG game, and especially in the card pack that you can download, which is basically just a mini portfolio of his artwork. So really good illustrations. It's nice, like I say, it's nice to have a good collection that you can leaf through. And, even something here by Vilat Guns, if I'm not butchering that name, this is a very classic, line art illustration, almost draftsman-like pen and ink approach to illustration using the hatch. Just the definition of, contour by where the lines end, where the lines begin, a cross-hatching in the shingles of the castle's roof. Very distinct styles. Again, here, you can get the feeling, you start to be able to identify the artist's work. This is another Vilat piece. It's the cross-hatching that begins to make it identifiable. Whereas, with Ingram's, it is that it sometimes has a tendency to be a bit sketchy and sometimes has a tendency to be a little bit more on the technical side. You can kind of see that in the floating castle approach. This isn't as sketchy as the dwarf, but we still have that saturation in black, the outlining of shape. Nice helm illustrations here. Always, kind of an interesting mix of what feels like sci-fi and fantasy, which Crown and Skull does kind of lean into. Then we move into our DM's guide section here. Skills and saves, a little bit more Starfarer. And then we move into another. The Learning Stone is always a section where we get to dive into a little bit of the fiction, which, if you listen to Runehammer's podcast, pretty much think 99% of the time he's always opening that with fiction. And it may or may not have to do with Crown and Skull. I think it is very, very topical to whatever he's playing or working on. Here we have a nice, no players read, players don't read any further. So this is like the section that you're not supposed to read. And this is nice too. This is something that has been cropping up a lot lately in books, is the you don't need to have a 2-page spread on a map. And if the map is illustrated in such a way that it gives you the shapes, much like a drawing does, any drawing should give you the shapes to provide context, right? We can see clearly where things are divided here. This feels very much like a Ingram Bernal drawn map, much like the way you could identify, what are some of the artists from Campaign Cartographer? Or the way you can identify a Dyson map, right? You know a Dyson map when you see it because of the way he does his hatching, the way he structures his line art, and his lettering is very noticeable or identifiable, I should say. So I'm definitely looking forward to diving further and further in. There you go. See, there's another nice, really, the contrast in his styles. And I know this seems more like we're talking about Ingrid's artwork more than anything else, but this is very clean, right? This is a nice, clean map versus what we saw earlier. This is pretty clean in here, but you get a little bit more that heavy saturation of black. Even though, like, I can tell this is a chasm, right? I know this is a drop, whereas this is a very clean, feels like it says Starport Citadel, so this feels a little bit technical. This feels a little bit techy, spaceshipy. Going back to, if you've played D&D back from the early days, Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, where, that map looked like a flying saucer because of its shape. So, and then again, kind of move into Emperor's Secrets, Learning Stone again. And the book follows that format. When you move into a new chapter, you always get a little bit of Learning Stone. And I know some people are opposed to the idea of getting a little bit of fiction in their game because so many people do want to just have a new rule set that they can use to play a game, whatever genre it may be, in a little bit of a different way. But they want that room to have the creativity to make it their own. Come on, when you look at YouTube, there's no end to the amount of videos that are done on map making and drawing and prop making and, all this other stuff that goes into gameplay, right? Creating the artifacts of play. And fiction is one of those. Some people like it, some people don't. If you're really into a setting, it helps. But the unfortunate thing is, not everybody at the table is going to read the fiction to really immerse themselves in it. It's an unfortunate thing, but it does happen, but it's worth the time. In Ingram's case, he has a legendarium. I mean, he's an artist. He's used to, working in sketchbooks, and oftentimes I can imagine that he sketches and writes, and sometimes, like, I watch artist channels on YouTube and they talk about, filling up sketchbooks, right? So if you're just going through and drawing and drawing and drawing, eventually, words are going to start popping in your head to linguistically start to connect some of these images together. And drawing and illustration is just another form of world building. It doesn't matter if it's written and you've got an encyclopedia. I don't think it's not Map Crow, but there's another guy on YouTube who's creating I'm just totally drawing the blank. This is why I don't do a lot of videos off the cuff, right? Because my brain will just stop thinking about what it is. But it's great to look at, random charts, always good to have. I'm not a person who, when I'm running games, am totally opposed to. It's always good to have charts. Don't get me wrong. They help. They're handy, and they're definitely lots of stuff that we've got here for random charts, and a few of the NPCs already done up. Ending on that, of course, Runehammer Online. Ending with another page of artwork. So, Ingram is going out on a limb. I know Runehammer has a large following, but the guy is going out on a limb. He's challenging himself on many fronts. I mean, what artist doesn't? As far as his illustrations, his artwork, and now his venture into brick and mortar, right? So if you're looking for, something a little different, and like I said, I haven't played it yet, so I can't speak to mechanics. This is not a game review. This is just a first look. If you're looking for something different, if you're looking for something that is a solid collection that has a different view about game making, publishing, he has a vision, and that's what's important to me. He has a vision. He's working on execution. He is pushing his own boundaries. He is willing to talk about them out loud and to have, pushback against them. It's why he's on my shelf. So often you see many of us on YouTube with, full book loads, shelves load of books. These are only these two shelves right behind me are the ones that actually contain the books that I have kept. I used to collect a lot of stuff, but life got in the way. Went into culinary, became a chef, and that didn't leave much time for anything else. And I wasn't playing games, and so I sold off a ton of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons supplements from back in the day. And I always regret never keeping a hold of. I actually had to replace my Magenta box D&D, which I totally just happenstance found that at a local store, and almost complete. It was only missing a D10, and but it's worth having books like this. Can you hear the phone going off in the background? That's probably a spam call going on. I'll probably leave this in because they say videos should have authenticity in them, and stuff like this is what you should be having going on. Thank God they hung up. Anyway, support the independents. Support the people you like. Support the people you have an appreciation for. And Runehammer, if you see this, job well done, man. The books look great. The layout is great. The art is great. The writing, everything that I've read so far in these books is good. Editing is fair to good. So stick with it, man. And if you're looking for something different, it's definitely looks good on your shelf.